Good evening, Oxnard. Welcome to this presentation by the League of Women Voters of Ventura County. I'm David Marin, moderator and a member of the League of Women Voters. Tonight, we're going to hear from the two candidates running for Oxnard Treasurer. Before we begin the program, we are going to hear from the president of the League of Women Voters, Ventura County, Betsy Patterson.
Good evening. I'm happy to welcome you all on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Ventura County. 100 years ago, the 19th Amendment was ratified, giving women across the nation the right to vote. We hold the right to vote precious since not all people were given that right in the original Constitution. And for 100 years, the League of Women Voters has been dedicated to encouraging civic engagement and informing voters about the candidates and the issues. From its beginnings and continuing today, the League is a nonpartisan political organization. We do not support or oppose any candidate or political party. Each of us has a voice in our government, but only if we use our vote. To be informed voters, we must ask questions of the candidates and understand the pros and cons of the ballot propositions before we cast our vote. This is your opportunity as voters to learn about the candidates and where they stand on issues important to you. Thank you for joining us tonight. We hope you have many of your questions answered, and please be sure to make a plan to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Earlier, we randomly drew numbers to assign the order. We're going to hear from James Aragon first for the opening statements, followed by Phillip Molina. We'll then take the questions submitted from the audience, and then at the end of the night, we'll reverse it for closing statements. Candidates will have 1 minute, 30 seconds for all of the activities tonight. So when you're ready, James, please begin.
Okay. Hello, everyone. James Aragon, as it says down there at the bottom of my screen. It's a real honor to be joining, to have been invited by the League of Women Voters for this forum. I remember back in the day when the League of Women Voters were the debate holders and sponsors, and back in the even to the presidential elections. And so I've known of the League of Women Voters for a long time. So this is really neat for me. I have a background. I'm retired military. I was Air Force intelligence for 20 years. And through a little bit of some accident and some luck, I was able to break out of the defense industry into banking. I was hired as a risk compliance auditor for a bank, a retail bank, and I did that for 7 years. I then was recruited into doing contracts for another bank, and that's what I do today. But I have a real passion for risk compliance and audit. I love internal controls, and I was approached to look into running for this office, just as providing another alternative to Mr. Molina, who, by the way, I've met and we get along just fine. But I have a passion for the city of Oxnard's ability to come out of dark into the light, and that's what I want to do if I were to become city treasurer. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Phillip Molina.
I want to thank the League of Women Voters to invite me to this. I appreciate it very much. I'll give you a brief history. I was born in France. At age 13, I started picking tomatoes for 25 cents an hour. I was elected California Boy State Representative from my high school. I received a full scholarship to university in 1965, and I received a pre-law and political science degree in '69. I also received a scholarship to LSU Law School. In June of '69, I married my wife, my beautiful wife, Linda, and that was the best decision I've ever made. I was drafted, though, a few months later in the U.S. Army in August of '69. I served at Fort Leonard Wood, Fort Sill, Fort Belvoir, and Fort Carson, and I received an honorable discharge in 1973. I graduated from the Combat Engineer Officer School at Fort Belvoir in 1971. I have a CPA, though my license, I've retired my license as I don't do official auditing anymore. I have an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration, and I received a certification from Ventura County for being a certified county mediator. I have 30 years experience as a finance director and auditor in California and in the state of Illinois. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak, and I would ask for your vote. And James and I do get along well. As our professions indicate, we agree on most everything.
Thank you, Phil. We're going to stay with you, Phil, for the first question. Both of you have sort of touched on this in the open, but give you a chance to get into more detail. Phil, what is the best way for voters to judge the capabilities of a city treasurer? What are your skills and the background that you think support the reason you should be elected?
Well, I think you want to look at the experience. I believe you would want to make sure that the person has experience in the financial area, banking, auditing, financial statement preparation, investing funds, or at least the ability to quickly learn and be able to do that. I think it's important to make sure that there are no negative comments concerning the license, because that might be an issue. I would also look at past experience. And in my case, 20 years ago, I was told when I joined the city that the city was bankrupt and they wanted to turn the city over to the state of California. I asked for 30 days and they gave me 30 days. And with a good CPA, my controller, we were able to find that the city staff had created funds that were not legal. That is, they were not established by the legal requirement, and all the money had been placed in these different funds. So we accumulated the cash, we brought it back over to the general fund, had KPMG, one of the top auditors, re-audit the financial statements and determine that we were now solvent. So I think when you look at that kind of experience, it indicates the person is qualified to be the city treasurer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. James, same question to you. What do you think is the best way for voters to judge the capabilities of a city treasurer? What are your skills and background to support the reason you should be elected?
I mean, I'll piggyback on what Mr. Molina said. Obviously, the work history of what somebody's done, it needs to have some sort of background. And I'll widen the scope a little bit. The city treasurer is not just responsible for keeping the money safe, but is also involved in investing. And so, anybody who's got a background in auditing, anybody who's got a background in internal controls, anybody who's got a background in overseeing teams, both just his own, but also working across groups, is obviously going to be beneficial to the position. I think also, an investment advisor, someone who's been an investment advisor as a career would be somebody who can come in. You're going to need somebody who's flexible of mind. Some folks who are in a field, they actually have a narrow scope. And so you don't want somebody who can only look through a straw of what their expertise is. You need somebody who can adapt, has a quick learning ability, and is able to apply knowledge in different sectors, because we're talking about city financials, and you understand financials in public works, as well as police forces, as well as the fire department, as well as streets and all those things. So somebody with a broad mind and who can bring that expertise.
Thank you. James, we'll stay with you for the next question. What do you think is the right role for the treasurer and the city council? What does that relationship look like to you between the treasurer and even other electeds like the city council or staff like city manager? What do you believe is the right fit or the right role? Let me put it that way. The right.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I really envision, a working relationship. Really, in my mind, you have the city council who's been elected by the residents to prioritize what folks want, what they need. And so they decide how money is going to be spent. City manager is hired by the city council to execute those priorities and to spend the money to achieve the objectives that have been laid out by the city council, in theory, per the residents' wants and needs. When a city treasurer comes, there's a city attorney who advises, make sure everything's on the up and up and within the law. What the city treasurer brings to the table is that oversight, making sure that when the money's being spent, that it's being spent on the up and up. That if there's an investment plan of an investment strategy, that strategy is being met. That there are efficiencies being done. That everything is above board, if you will. So if we want roads to be paved, then and then we get the cost estimates of what that is going to be, and then we over to you to make sure that those investments, that money being spent is being spent as it needed and not being diverted for untoward reasons.
Thank you. Phil, same question to you. How do you think the city treasurer should report to the city council? What do you think is the right relationship between the treasurer and the administration and electeds? And you should see a little thing on your screen asking you to unmute.
There, is that better?
Perfect. Okay.
I would like to agree with James. I think we need to have a good working relationship between the council, the mayor, and the city treasurer. I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding by the council that the city treasurer would try to redirect their decisions to spend money elsewhere, and that's not the role of the city treasurer. The city treasurer is there to make sure that the appropriations, the direction that the council has given to the city staff is in fact followed. Otherwise, they have no understanding whether or not the staff is doing what they want with the money or doing something else. And it's important to make sure that when we prepare monthly financial reports, that they're prepared in a manner that's understandable and easy to follow by the elected officials and the public. And so I think the treasurer's, one of the main duties of the treasurer needs to make sure that financial reporting isn't just dumping a bunch of numbers out into an audience and saying, you figure out, or preparing a graph that shows total revenues all combined into one, which is not the way cities are operated. They have special funds, they have general fund, they have enterprise funds, and each one needs to be kept separately. And that's the role of the treasurer, to collect and keep the money safe and also report what's happening on a factual basis.
Thank you. Phil, we'll stay with you for the next question. Measure L is on the ballot. This measure has multiple things that it's attempting to do. Some of that is changing the role of the treasurer. Can you take a moment to tell us whether you support or oppose Measure L, what you find acceptable, what you disagree with, and why?
Well, I'm going to jump ahead, and I believe I'm saying the truth when I say that both Jim and I are in support of Measure L. Without Measure L, the city treasurer becomes just a knob on the hood. Measure L does nothing more than establish for the city of Oxnard, a general law city, the rules and the statutory duties on the elected city treasurer that the state already established. I think Jim went through many of them: to prepare monthly financial reports, to keep money safe, to collect taxes, to issue business license, to collect business license, to manage the investments. Those are the things that are established in what's referred to as Government Code 41001 through 41007. The fact that the city manager has stripped the city treasurer of these duties, he has in essence violated the California Constitution. So Measure L brings that information, that duty, responsibility back to the city treasurer, the way general law cities are supposed to be operated. And it's why I've had to take the city to court when we're hoping, we have the writs written, we're hoping that we'll be in court soon so that the judge can make the final decision on that.
Thank you. James, same question to you as far as your position on Measure L, how you would describe it, what you like, what you don't.
Yeah, it seems to me Measure L, all it really does is solidify what the spirit of the California statutes outlines, what a city treasurer is supposed to be doing, and then provide a little more context. And so I think Measure L is just a great way to ensure that the residents of Oxnard have a independent elected official who is providing ground truth on what's actually occurring. How's the city council spending their money? How's the city manager executing that spend? And really being driven towards providing that, as Phil mentioned, easy to read financial statements so people can understand how money's being spent. And then they can see, if you want X, we might have to give up something other letter, and what that may be and what those buckets look like. But then people can't see it now, they can't understand it now, and so they get really frustrated with how money's being spent because they don't understand financials. They don't understand why money's going towards this and not to this. And so I think Measure L is a great step forward. I think it'll make Oxnard really build that trust between residents and the city government, because right now there just isn't any. And it's been that way since I returned back in 2017. I was shocked to see that.
We'll stay with you, James, for the next question. And this, let's build on the Measure L. So the question is, if Measure L passes and then the city later adds a chief finance officer, describe that relationship that you would expect to have for the benefit of the city. I don't know if the city would be adding a finance officer or not, but that is the question.
Right. The Measure L actually makes the city treasurer the chief financial officer. And so if Measure L passes, the city treasurer becomes the chief financial officer. But it's going to be a big staff, and it's going to require a lot of expertise. So city treasurer / chief financial officer is going to be the head of that division. But there's going to be plenty of need for expertise in all the different elements and all the different areas that people touch. So the city treasurer is supposed to be able to appoint a deputy city treasurer. And then the city council has to support that with salary, et cetera. But that role, so the current chief financial officer, he doesn't really have to go anywhere because his expertise is still going to be needed. And it just becomes under the city treasurer as opposed to directly under the city manager now.
Thank you. Phil, same question to you. James has answered it a little bit, but can you talk about the role of the city treasurer and as the chief finance officer and how that relationship will work with the administration and the council?
Well, I think overall, Jim pretty well identified it.
I'm sorry, Phil. We accidentally muted you. If you want to unmute and start over, we'll get that right. Having a little technical difficulties here. So yeah, please share with us your thoughts about the treasurer, as the chief finance officer, working with the city administration and the council.
I thank you. Yeah, the under Measure L, the city treasurer is the city treasurer and finance director. And in 3 of the previous cities I worked at, I functioned in that capacity as the city treasurer and the finance director. 2 of the cities, there was a separate elected city treasurer, but they came to me and said, please handle a treasurer's duty. And I would work with them to make sure that they knew what was happening because they were the ones responsible. And I think in the situation you're identifying, as James said, I would love to post every individual debit and credit. That is just part of what I am. The fact of the matter is I won't be able to do that, and I haven't been able to do that in 20 years. You rely on professional people to be the budget manager, to be the accounts payable manager, to be the financial reporting manager, and you place upon them the requirements and demands, and then you have them report back to you on a regular basis to make sure that the things you want done are done properly. And likewise with the Treasury Department, when I was there, I didn't handle every one of the transactions or count every dollar that came through, but we rely on people to get the work done. So it's a matter of supervision and management.
All right, Philip, we'll stay with you for the next question. So if you are elected, what are some of the best practices that you think Oxnard should adopt that are not currently in place? What are some of your priorities if you are elected?
Well, I think the first priority, and as I've been saying previously, is to prepare monthly financial reports that are prepared in a manner that's consistent with government accounting and prepared in a manner that is understandable. One of the first things we need to do is, I feel that over the last couple of years, we have been dumbing down the council and the public. We have little pictures of people climbing ropes and coming down ropes, and we have pictures of cars and buses, and we use that to tell a financial statement. we need to educate council, and it's not that difficult if you do it properly and you show them the major revenue types, the expenditures by department, you show them the annual budget, you show them the amount that's spent, the percentage that's spent compared to the budget, and then you look at the metrics within each department. Are they, if you're half of the year through expending, are they half of the year through on their goals? So those are some of the priority things that need to be done. In my opinion, that's one of, if not the top priority, because without understanding that information, council's making these financial decisions in the blind. They have no idea what they've approved. They have no idea whether what they approved 6 months ago is being properly processed, is being handled the way they approved it. So while it may sound redundant or arcane, it is extremely important. Once we do that and educate the council and the public on good financials, everything starts to clean up and clear up.
Thank you, Philip. So James, same question to you. Based on your experience, what are some of the best practices that you think Oxnard should adopt that are currently not in place? What would be a couple of your top priorities?
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting things that Measure L presents is performance measurements. Now, I understand the city manager is getting something together to do that. I feel like their timetable is a little longer than it needs to be. But I think, for example, there's two things, performance measures, but also just wise investing. And I'll give a real quick example. I think it's a completely legitimate purchase, but they will be purchasing a lot of waste bins for recycling to meet recycling needs and also do replacement. But one of the things that they don't present to city council is sort of like when's that payback? So when you get all these, you spend all this money on recycling bins. These are large industrial size recycling bins. You know, how long does it take to get that paid back? And then if it's a long time to pay it back, maybe there's another approach. But they don't really kind of do that sort of analysis on whether or not it's money well spent. Same thing with the roads. They haven't fixed roads. And so as the roads get worse and worse, it becomes more and more expensive to fix them. So nobody's making decisions based on financial analysis. And I think that's something that can be done. The other piece is performance measurements. And I'll just give a great example. I asked this question at City Council about the work release program that we use for cleanup of parks, etc. In streets. Nobody can answer about how many hours are actually done.
Thanks, James. James, stay with you for the next question. So on Measure L, let's take the other side. And the questioner asked, the city council selects the city manager with the intent that the city manager be allowed to select all of the department heads who work for him. What makes the budget so different and so separate that it should not be under the control of the city manager?
Well, yeah, I mean it's a good and fair question. By statute, the city treasurer is supposed to oversee receipts and take care of the money provided to it by the residents through taxes, and so it makes sense that preparation of the budget would be done by the same person who's responsible for protecting that money. But the city treasurer and his staff, if Measure L were to pass, not be producing the budget in a vacuum. It would be unprofessional to do so. You'd have to team up with the priorities set by the city council, because they set the priorities, and the city manager, because he runs the departments that spend the money, to figure out what would be a good budget. And then that's it. They put their heads together, and then a budget presented from the city treasurer's office to the city council for approval. If the city treasurer were to do his own thing, it's just going to get voted no, and so you're going to have a crisis of faith in the city treasurer to perform, and then the government itself. So you want to elect somebody who wants to work with everybody else. And I don't see any evidence that myself or Mr. Molina doesn't want to work with anyone else. And so I think it's a fair question, but it's got answered.
Thank you. Phil, same question to you. As far as the city council selects the city manager, and he or she is expected to manage all the department heads, What makes the budget so different, so separate, that it should not be under the control of the city manager?
Well, I think we're talking about different things. We're talking about the budget process, working with department heads, identifying the priorities, and city manager would, and the city treasurer would be in the same meeting with the city manager. We would be asking the department heads what they need, why do they need it. We would be identifying, and these are primarily questions that the city manager is going to ask. This city treasurer is going to be the one putting that information to paper. And when you put it to paper, then you verify that the information is consistent with what has transpired. Right now, the city manager does not put the information he's getting to paper. He relies on his finance director to do that. So it would be no different. You're looking at the city treasurer as the chief financial officer, and the city treasurer and his staff would be putting that information to paper. We would have a better understanding of the different types of special funds, the grant funds, limitations on their use, the use of enterprise fund money. So we would help to direct when the council and the city manager says, you know what, I want to use the water enterprise money to build a rocket ship to the moon. Well, that's when we would step in and say, Mr. City Manager, Mr. Council, those are good ideas, but it violates the intent and the legal establishment of the water fund. So that's where we would give advice and make sure that the budget is prepared properly, consistent with state and federal law, and how council appropriated the money.
Thank you. Philip, we'll stay with you for the next question. Maybe you could tell us a little bit what you see on the horizon for the city as far as financial challenges. Let's just say that the Measure E does not pass. What are some of the major finance issues facing the city in the next 2 years? What should the residents be concerned about? And if you want to do that with Measure E passing, that's fine too.
Well, we can look at it with Measure E not passing, but there are other ballots on the measure to increase property tax for businesses who own, I think, more than $3 million of business assets. Their property taxes are going to be adjusted upward. That's going to generate revenue for the city. I'm not sure that the city has made any calculations to determine, should that pass, how much additional revenue would come to the city in terms of property tax. We would certainly need to do that immediately, pending the assumption that that particular measure passes. I think what we want to do is to look at police, fire, streets, water, sewer, solid waste, parks and recreation, and we want to look at methods in which we can improve their efficiency. And what I found is you don't fight staff, because every city I've worked at, including Oxnard as the city treasurer, when I wanted to know how to improve the condition in the department, the first people I go to are the people who work there. And I say, hey, you know, we've got to cut back. Do you see any ways of making this department more efficient? And you know what? They come up with a lot of reasons and a lot of ways to do it. We take a look to see, you know what? Some of those are very good ideas, and we can help make the city more efficient. We can follow the rules and regulations. Oftentimes, it's the city staff that have brought to my attention over these last 4 years problems with improper use of money, improper management methods. And so they're the first ones that will help identify the ways to make things more efficient.
Thank you. James, same question to you. What do you think are some of the major financial issues facing the city in the next couple of years?
I really honestly believe, and I've said this at a recent city council meeting, I really believe that there's a problem. The biggest financial issue that we have is lack of prioritization and this desire to do everything. And this may fall on the shoulders of residents themselves. You have a basket of money. So whether or not Measure E or Measure N, which could potentially end Measure O early, in the end, you have a basket of money. You have revenues and you have expenses, and they have to balance. So you have to prioritize what we're spending money on. And if you try to do everything, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. And then what you end up doing is getting subpar services across the board, as opposed to great services, and maybe doing something later. If residents really want something that's not the highest priority, maybe you have 5 priorities that you can do, and if priority 6 you can't do, but maybe they're willing to spend to go in a special tax to do that particular item. So I think if you can prioritize, then you know, sometimes it hurts when you do that because you might not be able to do this real special project that your heart's tied to, but at least you can then budget appropriately. And so I really think the city, both its residents and its government, need to work on prioritization.
Thank you. James, next question. We'll start with you. Certainly over the years, there's been a lot of questions about City Hall, different city managers, and all of that as far as transparency, those types of things. So if you were elected, what are some of the policies you'll do to promote transparency without interference from the city council or department heads?
Yeah, I think if, well, a couple of things. Obviously, if Measure L does not pass, then the city treasurer will be very limited in access to information, et cetera. And so really in that regard, I would like to see maybe roadshow about investments the city has. The trials, I know Mr. Molina is really struggling right now with the return on investments to be very low, the interest. And so but making people understand that there is that money and there's a reason why we have reserves and the income off those reserves in the trials. Measure L passes, then everything that the city treasurer does financially be an avenue to report that out, not just to the city council, but to the public. And that includes, you know, Mr. Molina has talked about the financial aspect, making financial reports readable to the average person, but also even I talked about performance measurements and just showing like, hey, this is being achieved by the public works and they've saved this much money. I mean, this type of information so people can understand at the neighborhood level, not just citywide level, but neighborhoods care about their park. Nobody in Southside Oxnard cares about the park near my house in East Village, right? So I think that's the idea, is at the neighborhood level, people can understand how money's being spent in their locality within the city. And I'd like to see more of that.
Thank you. Philip, same question to you. What will you do to promote transparency if you're elected and avoid and still promote transparency even if there's interference from the city council or department heads?
Well, if Measure L passes, and I do recommend voters vote for Measure L, it establishes, again, what state law says, and that is that we would need to present to the public and to the council the warrant register. Every time we issue checks, the public has the right to know, who did we write that check to? What was it for? Was it within the budget? Was it approved by the council? And so right now, you don't know that. We have millions of dollars being expended. You don't know whether they're consistent with the budget. When I was, before that duty was taken away from me, I found numerous times where invoices were exceeding the budget amount. I found times where the city manager and the city attorney were signing monthly invoices on contracts that expired years earlier. And it was not nefarious, but what they need to do, they need to bring that back to the council and say, hey, we're spending this money for this project. It expired 10 years ago. Do you want to continue it or not? That brings it to the public, brings it to the council, and they're the ones that decide. So you need to make sure that this kind of information is freely flowing. Also, the public has a right to know how much money I make, and the city manager and the city attorney and all the people. The only exceptions are the few, very few, police officers that are undercover. Otherwise, the public has a right to know how their money is being spent and see that the salaries and benefits are consistent with what they've approved. So to me, that would improve transparency.
Thank you, Philip. We're going to stay with you for the next question. I know neither one of you, if you're elected, would truly be a policymaker, but one of the things that's impacted all residents in Oxnard County and statewide is COVID and the coronavirus. What do you think will be the impacts of the economic recovery in Oxnard regarding COVID, and is there a role for the treasurer to play in handling the city's finances, its budget, layoffs, resources? Bill, we'll start with you.
Well, that's a very good and complicated question. There are some laws for pooled cash that provides the opportunity to lend some of that money on a commercial basis. If things don't begin to improve, and we have businesses that are important and vital to the city's life function, and they need an infusion of money, we would need to verify the law, and to the extent that the law provides, the city may want to direct the city treasurer to invest some of that money on a local level. As James had mentioned, right now, the investments that we have are earning, I think, 0.2%. Obviously, we would be lending money at a higher rate. I think we also, as James has said, we're going to have to prioritize things. We're going to have to say, hey, we can't live beyond our means. Your mom and dad, my mom and dad taught us early, look, when you live beyond your means, you don't stay in your house very long. So we need to start learning what is it that is absolutely necessary and what is it that we may not be able to afford until the recovery happens. So those are maybe a couple of things. And that was a good question, and I was not fully prepared for it, David. Thank you.
You're not supposed to be prepared for every question. That's the point of democracy here. Hear from the voters. Okay, James, same question to you. If COVID, the impacts on the local economy and businesses, what do you think is the role for the treasurer, the finance department in the areas of budgeting, layoffs, support for business?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, back to the team effort. The city treasurer and city council, city manager, senior department heads all need to get their heads together and understand, what is the revenue stream runs city services, and regardless, and should probably have some strategic plans about the different forks in the road that come ahead. In the end, although we don't know what would have happened without forced shutdowns, and so, but certainly airlines would be suffering, and certainly some businesses would be suffering, and we don't know what lies ahead, and so we could find a vaccine that's worked really well, and so the impact going down the road to a couple of years down the road is minimal, and kind of back to normal. We could find that we have a vaccine, but it doesn't work so great, and we're still going to have waves of needing to minimize contact in businesses. And so, from my point, the city treasurer's role is, as far as understanding city finances, is to get together and problem solve. I would be a champion for prioritizing and making sure, listen, we can do nothing on the roads and then have these services here, but is that what we want to do long term? What's the long term plan? So I think the city treasurer really role is being part of the team that solves the problems when it comes down to limited revenues.
Thank you. We're about out of questions. I have one left here that we'll start with you, James. And tell us a little bit about why you think you should be the next city treasurer. What is it that you think distinguishes you from your opponent?
We have two different backgrounds. Mr. Molina is obviously he is the professional city treasurer here. I mean, he has been doing this a long time, and I know that if I were to win, I'd have do some learning with a lot of the apparatus inside the city and how that works. I'm kind of guy who's done that my entire life and jump in running. So what differentiates me on the positive, is I have a very strong background in internal controls, developing and critiquing. For example, in my last role with another bank prior to my current employer, I audited everything from small mom and pop attorney firms to publicly traded billion-dollar companies. Audited compliance, audited their internal controls, and I became very good at it. I found things that their own high-end KPMG type auditors didn't find, and found gaps, and it was related to my company's expectations. But I'm very strong in that regard, in auditing, analyzing risk, ensuring compliance. So that's really my strength. But I think really that also just another voice, a new voice, somebody new to build relationships with the city. It takes two sides of tango, but that's what I bring.
Thank you. And Philip, same question to you. What do you think is the reason that you should be elected city treasurer? What distinguishes you from your opponent?
Well, I think James and I are very similar in terms of our professional background. And I know we're supposed to be distinguishing ourselves, but hats off to James. The work that he's done, the experience that he has is outstanding. Um, I've been chief financial officer for the cities for 30 years in California. I've been a state auditor for the Department of Insurance in Illinois, where I was able to find a CEO that was embezzling from his own national insurance company. Turned that over to the Attorney General, and they handled it. My experience here in Oxnard uniquely provides me the opportunity to get started immediately. Should the voters choose to support Measure L, I'm able to get started right away. I know the players, and I've always tried to and will continue to try to work with the council and the city manager. We've had our differences, but that's part of human nature. I want to work with all the department heads. We're going to need to get together and work through what's going to happen over the next 6 months to a year, depending on whether we do get some kind of vaccine for the virus or not. And there's going to be a slow, gradual bring back of businesses to the state as through the United States. So my experience and then my willingness to work with the staff and everyone on the council, I think helps.
Thank you. Candidates, at this time, we're going to go ahead and begin closing statements. Phil, when you're ready, you have 1.5 minutes.
I appreciate that. And I apologize.
We'll go ahead and reset your timer and let you get started.
Oh, that's right.
Thank you for staying with us. Here we go. Whenever you're ready.
Yes, sir. 4 years ago, the public, Oxnard, elected me as the city treasurer to root out waste, mismanagement, and corruption. Fortunately, my background is a CPA with a master's in business administration, and inside knowledge as the former Oxnard finance director prepared me for this task. I've encountered resistance in doing my job, but because of the support of the public, I stopped payments on long-term contracts. I prevented payments that were lacking budget authority. I investigated the unauthorized use of overtime. I blocked duplicate payments to vendors, fought against cronyism and sweetheart deals, recovered unauthorized loans. I think you'll remember the $1.7 million issue that I brought up. Closely monitored cash receipts, successfully lobbied for an independent auditor and whistleblower. And I earned the city of Oxnard the highest award that the California Municipal Treasurers Association issues. We were the #1 city out of 472 cities in the state of California for our investment policy. During that same time, I was able to earn over $13 million for the city. I wish it was more, but the current economic condition is such that it's going to be hard to do. City of Oxnard City Hall sometimes have put roadblocks in my path, and that's why I need everyone's help. I ask that you vote yes on Measure L, the Oxnard Financial Transparency and Accountability Act, to check on the expenditures that the city manager has. And as such, I ask that you vote for me as the city treasurer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And James, when you're ready, 1.5 minutes.
All right, thank you very much for this opportunity. And thanks, Mr. Molina, for joining me again. It's always interesting to hear what you have to say. I've been accused during this campaign, which is why I eschew politics, but of not being serious candidate, of not taking it seriously. And I don't know if that's because I have a beard or because I like to chuckle once in a while. But if I didn't care, I wouldn't have ran. And I think that the city is really sad. When I was in high school in Oxnard, I went to Oxnard High, class of '93. When I paid attention to city politics then, and city had a lot of construction. We were building lots of new houses, and the city was really running high. Now, if there was corruption or whatever, I'm not really aware of, but the city was really running high. But today, when I returned in 2017, the city, people left and right were telling me that the city was corrupt, that they don't care, that they're just a bunch of politicians that want to be elected to the office. I think that's really sad. It doesn't necessarily speak to those persons in government as individuals, but I think there's just a need for transparency in this city so that residents can have confidence in their government. Because if there's no confidence, then nothing can work, especially in hard times. The city residents would have to be willing to help out. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you candidates for participating tonight. A reminder, this is the race for the Oxnard Treasurer. I'd like to take a moment to thank our volunteers, Maddie, Ruby, Betsy you met earlier, Pat Essek, who heads up voter services, and Cheryl. Also want to take a moment to remind voters that you should be receiving your ballots. All registered voters will receive a ballot. The league encourages you to return those by October 16th so that you can make sure that they're counted. Actually, October 20th is probably still adequate. Now, keep in mind that any ballot, as long as it's postmarked by November 3rd, will still be counted as long as it's received by the elections department by November 20th. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. If you are voting by mail, I'd like to remind everyone to make sure you fill out the outside envelope, sign it, date it, put your name and address. And with that, we'll thank everyone for joining us, and we'll see you at our next forum. As a reminder, the league will be hosting a forum for Congresswoman Julia Brownley and her opponent, Rhonda Kennedy. That'll be tomorrow night at 5 p.m. You can visit the league's website, lwvventuracounty.org. Click on candidate forums, scroll down, and you can register for that forum as well. Thank you to the candidates. I'm David Marin with the League of Women Voters. Good evening.
Thank you.